It's always a joy to come to Stockton in July. For decades, First Baptist Church Stockton have been shining light for many churches who are part of growing healthy churches. And when I first came to California to be a pastor, First Baptist Church Stockton taught me and encouraged me in so many ways. I was a pastor down in the Fresno area. And that's now continuing through Pastor Brad and the staff and you guys. So here's the thing. 12 churches a day close in North America. Whoa. 12 churches a day. And then, if that's a bad figure, here's another bit of data. We are recording the lowest number ever of under 30-year-olds coming to faith in Jesus Christ in North America. The lowest number ever. And we're also recording the highest number of 30-year-olds who are leaving the faith, quitting the church. So we got a big task ahead of us. And with the help of, I'm excited that Brad sits at the strategic leadership table and helping me and other pastors put in place some strategy to bring support and care and help to churches and pastors. And I know that First Baptist Church Stockton in the years ahead are going to play a big part in that. So look forward to that. October the 20th, mark it in your schedule. You can drive over to San Ramon. It's a Friday evening, and it's going to be a service of renewal and commitment and vision at a church called Church of the Valley in San Ramon. And that's when we relaunch a new feel and a new direction for growing healthy churches. And everybody is invited to that. But let's get to preaching, okay? And there's a big possibility that you will not like this preach. In fact, this could be my last preach ever in Stockton. I'm not doing it deliberately because I love coming here in July. But here we go. Ready? Sometimes I am so disappointed with myself. I wear Nike running shoes. You wouldn't think I'm a runner because I've been on 3 weeks vacation and eaten every single day, but I get my Nikes on sale normally, but I still spend over $100. And I wear them as a luxury when I run. The rest of the day, I wear another pair of shoes. I rotate between 5 pairs of shoes. My wife Bethany, who's with us this morning, rotates between 27 pairs of shoes. But this preach is not about her and the guilt that she should now be feeling. I wear Nike shoes knowing full well that they were made by a factory worker who earns maybe $1.25 a day. Jim Keedy left his role as a college professor, traveled to Indonesia, and he tried to live on the daily budget of the local Nike workers for a month. He lost over 20 pounds. He lived in a 9-foot by 9-foot cement box. He slept on a thin mat, contributed to the open sewage that fumes add to the pollution you could cut through and choke the life out of you. Jim had been a soccer coach at a prestigious American college. That prestigious college, their sports program was sponsored by Nike. Jim refused to wear Nike clothing. He was fired. I still wear Nike. Sometimes I am so disappointed with myself. I wear all-American Levi blue jeans. America didn't invent jeans. Actually, it was the French. But we made them cool. Like, think Happy Days and Fonzie, you know. My favorite jeans, the ones that I have on just now, I buy them at Banana Republic. Always on sale. They're made in Bangladesh. It's always 85 degrees there with 85% humidity. No AC, no workers' rights, 14-hour days. It's why we call them sweat shops. My underpants, Sri Lanka. My socks, Mexico. My shirt, Cambodia. None of the people who've made my clothes drive a car. They can't afford that. I have to. We own a house. We'd be embarrassed to tell you how much our house is worth. The people who made my clothes will possibly live until their early 40s. They will then catch a preventable disease, but with no money, they can't treat it, and it will kill them. I disappoint myself. I disappoint myself. I eat at Taco Bell. Now that in itself is disappointing, you know. And really, mainly I do that because my wife, Bethany, likes Taco Bell, okay? She's an Indiana girl, comes from Cornville, you know, a hillbilly. But, you feeling guilty yet? No. About the shoes? No. Okay. But I know Taco Bell's parent company. It's called Yum Yum. Ironic. But I know that Yum Yum pay their tomato pickers a ridiculously low wage. And maybe it's improved a little bit in the past years because they were put under the spotlight. But it's very nearly a modern form of slavery, which my purchase of a Taco Bell taco funds. The list could go on of the ways I disappoint myself, let alone disappoint others, especially those whose sweat and abuse I profit from. You see, I'm a Christian. I claim to hold to the teachings of the Holy Scriptures. I say I follow Jesus. I confess him as my Lord. I have pledged my allegiance to him and to his kingdom. And things like justice and equality and mercy and shalom are traits of his kingdom. But I have inconsistencies. Like, I guess a kinder way to say it is, hi, my name is Gilbert, and I'm a hypocrite. I say this, but I do this. I believe this, but I practice that. I hold to this, but I support that. I teach this, but I buy Nike. And this is what disappoints me. Why and how? And well, I want to tell you, I need to tell you, it's not that there are two of me. Like, there's not the good Gilbert and then the not so good Gilbert. It's not that there's the faithful Gilbert and the unfaithful Gilbert. It's not even that there's the Christian Gilbert and some days the unchristian Gilbert. That's not what's happening. Rather, I have two Jesuses. I have the Jesus that is spoken of and revealed in the Holy Scriptures. And I believe that Jesus. But I have another Jesus. A Jesus that fits my lifestyle. And some days, I believe and follow that Jesus more than the real Jesus. Some days, I bow down to the other Jesus. And I know it's sucking the life out of me. And I know that this true, meaningful, overflowing, vibrant, eternal life that Jesus, the true Jesus, offers, I so dilute the way my life works. I bow down to the other Jesus because I prefer the other Jesus some days. What he asks of me is a little bit easier. I mean, the true Jesus, the real Jesus, he asks that I die to self, that I take up my cross daily and follow him. The other Jesus just asks for 10%. The true Jesus asks me to love my neighbor and to do good to those that hate me, and I have to love my enemy and turn the other cheek. Oh, yay. The other Jesus just asks me to check the box. Do I believe this? Yeah. And if my conscience bothers me about my clothes or about helping the poor, well, there's not a lot I can do about the global poverty issues. So let's just stick a picture of on the fridge of a little kid that I give $25 a month to help. The idol Jesus, the other Jesus, makes it easier. The true Jesus, he's too extreme. He's too radical. You could get killed if you did everything that other Jesus asked you to do. The other Jesus, the idol Jesus, he allows me to come to church on a Sunday, but like on a Monday, I'm just like everybody else. I have two Jesuses. And some days, I choose to follow the wrong one. And if there's an area of my life where the other Jesus wins, it's in the area of money. So, take a deep breath. We're going to scratch where we all itch. I'm going to ask everybody, pull out your wallet or your checkbook or your debit card or something that represents your financial life. It could be the few bucks you've got on you, a money belt or a money a clip of money, whatever you've got, okay? Some of you have it. Some of us are still old-fashioned. Like my wife, she just needs to pull out her phone because it's called the Apple app. And she just clicks and scans it, and she doesn't know where the money comes from, but it seems to pay for everything. Really giving you a hard time over those shoes. And I'll tell you why I'm giving you a hard time over the shoes, because as we drove here this morning, we were up at 4:30 to be here for the 8 o'clock service. You weren't. Bethany confessed that she's got 2 pairs of the exact same shoe. I'm going to preach on poverty a little bit, and she's got 2 pairs of the exact same shoe. Well, pull out your wallet, and just for a minute, like you can caress it if you need to. What you hold in your hand is what a Christian writer calls the temple of the 21st century. Most people who live on your street or work beside you in your school or your office, or they believe that their ability to experience happiness or security or importance is directly associated with the contents of this little container. This is where one of the biggest gods in America live, whom the Bible calls Mammon. Like think about it. In America, you can reach godlike stature if you can convince people that you have a godlike bank balance. And as fallen creatures, we get a little bit out of control when it comes to this thing and these things. Some of us want to hoard it. And some of us find that it burns holes in our pockets. Some of us work crazy, crazy long hours to keep filling it. Some of us get real good at emptying it. And some who are really good at emptying it try to make sure that they marry somebody who's pretty good at filling it. Some of us give this little piece of leather the power to make us feel secure, successful, valuable. And all of us find it real hard to surrender control of this. Because who's the real issue, the real question is who's in charge? Am I holding it, or is it holding me? So, we're going to take a little baby step of surrender this morning. You're going to like this a lot. I want you to hand this piece of leather, or your debit card, or whatever you got, to the person sitting next to you. Hand it over. And it's a good thing you did that, because we're now going to take an offering. And I want you to give the way that you've dreamed you would be able to give, you know? Like, Scripture said God loves a cheerful giver. You know the word cheerful in the Greek, which the New Testament is written in, is the word hilarios, from which we get our word hilarious. So let's give hilariously this morning with somebody else's money. Wouldn't it be great if you could just give that kind of way? Imagine if you could be the generous person you want to be. You ever met a generous person? Like, I've got two close friends who are the most generous people I know. Here's two questions. See if you can answer these questions. Number one, who do you personally know that could truly be called a generous person? Okay. Can you think of their name? Who is it in your world, in your life, in your surroundings, you would say, that's a generous person? And number two, do you think anybody would have thought of your name? True story. A woman's in an airport waiting to get on a plane. And she buys a little snack of her favorite Oreo cookies. She's in the waiting area, she's sitting down, and there's a man that she doesn't know sitting next to her. On the little armrest between them, there's this little snack bag of Oreos. And without saying a word, the guy sitting next to her reaches in and takes out a cookie and starts to eat it. She's furious. So she reaches into the bag and she takes out a cookie and starts to eat it. And he just smiles and nods at her. Apparently he can't speak any English. And he reaches in and takes another cookie. And she's livid. So she reaches in and she takes another cookie. And they both keep doing this until there's only one cookie left. And the man reaches in and he takes the last cookie and he breaks it in half and he offers half to her. And then he eats the other half. She's beside herself. She gets on the plane, sits down in her seat. She reaches into her pocket bag and she sees that her bag of cookies is still in her purse. Not only did he not eat her cookies, she was eating his cookies and didn't even know it. Whose cookies are you eating? You think those cookies are really yours? You're getting the point, aren't you? We think it's ours. We have the audacity to think that it's ours. You see, the problem is, I'm rich. And the true Jesus tells us that it's very hard for a rich person to follow him. It's as hard, he says, as a camel trying to go through the eye of a needle. Now that's really a hump day. But don't judge me. You're rich as well. If your household makes over $2,000 a year, not a month, but a year, you're in the top 25% of wages in the world. If your household earns more than $25,000 a year, you're in the top 10% of wage earners in the world. And if your house earns more than $50,000 a year, you're in the top 1% of earners in the world. First Baptist Church, Stockton. It's full of rich people. To the rich, Jesus says these words. Luke's Gospel, chapter 12. Sell all you have. Give to the needy. Dang. Matthew 6, don't lay up for yourself treasures on earth where moth and rust, but lay up for yourself treasures in heaven. Or 1 Timothy chapter 6, as for the rich in this present world, command them not to be arrogant. Command them to do good and to be generous. Participation, okay? Raise your hand. Number one, how many of you, me included, would like to have more money? Be honest. Be honest. Question number two, how many of you believe that money buys happiness? Duh. There's something about the nature and the character of God that you need to know, and this frightens me. Dallas Willard said it well when he said these words, God ordained that people should be governed in the end by what they want. This just frightens me because I look into my own heart, and too often I know that what I want has more to do with me than obedience to humbly serving Christ. And I reckon that if you look into your heart, there might be a few selfish desires that are probably there. Let's try and quickly lay out why money can so often move us from desire to serious defeat in becoming the kind of people that God wants us to be. And the classic passage that I need to start with is Matthew's Gospel, chapter 6, verse 24. Matthew's Gospel, chapter 6, verse 24, no one can serve two masters, says Jesus. Either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. So let's put aside the myth that often is used that people would say, well, money's neutral, Gilbert. The Bible says it's the love of money that's wrong, not money itself. Well, in Matthew chapter 6, I suggest that Jesus says otherwise, because in Jewish literature, if you were to read that in the Greek, it ends, you cannot serve both God and money. And that word money is the word mammon. And mammon is an Aramaic word, and it means money, or it means wealth, or it means profit. But in Matthew chapter 6, this word mammon is personified as a power that enslaves you. It's not neutral. It's not inept. Money can master you. Money has that kind of power. And if you don't think money has power, then you're going to mess up real bad. Like in the Old Testament, you had false gods. False gods were often called Baals. And you had Baals who were the gods of fire, or the gods of fertility, or the gods of winds. But in the New Testament, there's only one clearly mentioned false god who has the power to trap you and hold you. And that false god is this word mammon, money. So how does it matter? How does it operate? How does it use its power? What's the power of money? Well, if you think about it, money, more than any other earthly commodity, holds out the allure of gaining God-like sovereignty. So, how would you feel, you think, if you were a god? Well, you'd feel powerful and secure and influential and independent and free and you could do what you like when you like. Like here's a question. If you won a $1 million lottery next week, then not that anybody in First Baptist Church Stockton buys a lottery ticket, that's for the Presbyterians, But if you won $1 million lottery, would that money make you feel a little bit more secure about your future? Would you feel a little bit more independent? If you won $1 million, would you feel that you're more your own man or woman? And well, I think you would. And that's the allure of money. It promises that it will do something for you if you can get enough of it. And the more we get of it, the more it can do something for us. Money talks. And money says, get more of me, and you'll feel happier, more secure, more influential, more independent, more in control of yourself. And this is the problem with money. The power of money, along with this seed of selfishness that rests in each of us, when we mix those two things together, I don't just want a little bit more money and a little bit more security. I want more and more and more, tons of it. I want it supremely. And when we get money and we see that it talks, we end up wanting more and more money, so much so that I don't need to rely on anybody else for my security. I don't need to get anyone else's permission for what I want to do. It will make me free, and no one will put boundaries on my life. I will be independent. And Satan uses the allure of money to try again do what he did in Eden. Make us believe that with all that money can promise, as knowledge would do in Eden, you will become like God. So the real wise person in the game of life is not the person with the most money. The real wise person in the game of life is the person who has the mastery over money. How do you know if you have mastery over your money? You're able to give it away. It's not just a church idea to do a Sunday morning offering. Like the board and the staff didn't just come up with an idea and say, you know, let's pass some buckets around on a Sunday morning and people can give us a little bit of money. That's a good idea for the church. No, that's not why we do tithing. We tithe because at that moment in a Sunday morning, it's a defining moment about you and about whether or not you're serving God or mammon, or whether or not this has mastery over you or you have mastery over it, whether or not money's holding you or God's holding you. It's a significant spiritual moment. And if you're missing that, you're missing so much of what God means in your life. Let me contrast the lie of Satan with a story from the Bible that spins the whole thinking of money in a different way. And it's found in the Old Testament. It's found in a book called 1 Kings chapter 17. And this is a real interesting story, and you're going to have to read it by yourself. I'm going to use excerpts from it as we get near the end of this talk this morning, okay? 1 Kings chapter 17, and we're back in times before Jesus, and there's a drought in the Near East, in the Far East, and the Near East, okay? And it's not like the kind of drought that we might experience in that part of the world. It didn't just mean that the grass would go brown, but people would die because there wouldn't be any water. And there was a little town, and that little town was called Zarephath. And in that little town, there was a woman. We don't know this woman's name. And we don't know much about her family. We don't know much about her, but we do know that she is at the bottom of the socio-economic ladder. She had once been a young wife with dreams. And she'd looked to the future and she thought about family and hope and what could happen. But now she was a widow. And she was a widow with no job and with no money. And she had no husband. All she had was a son who was too young to produce anything, so that son depended fully upon her for her and his survival. And on this particular day, if you read the story, she only had enough flour to make one meal for herself and for her son. And after that meal was finished, she would starve to death. This happened every day in her world, just as it happens every day in our world. Bethany and I are just back from East Africa and one of the global slums that we go to. And if you've never been to a global slum, you need to come with me one day. This will shake your world. So, the woman goes outside to gather some sticks to make a little fire to prepare her last meal. And as she does that, a stranger calls to her. And this stranger's name is Elijah. Now, Elijah has been one of the greatest prophets in the history of Israel. He was very courageous. He had made a serious enemy of the king of Israel, a man by the name of Ahab. And Elijah had called out his idolatry. And the king wasn't too happy with that. And so Elijah had to run away to save his life. And he had, for a couple of years, been just by a brook, a river, a small little stream called Kerith. But with the drought that was happening, the brook dried up. And so Elijah knew that he couldn't stay there because if there was no water, he would die as well. So he can't go back to Israel because Ahab's still angry with him. And so God says to him, Elijah, don't be afraid. I'm going to send you to another place. I'm going to send you to go to Zarephath. And I've arranged for someone there to look after you. And just a quick aside here. Elijah discovers that God works at both ends of the line. God worked in a brook to dry it up. And simultaneously, he was working in a widow's heart miles away. God works at both ends of the line. Sometimes we don't think that. Or sometimes we don't act like we believe that. Because sometimes when that well dries up, we try to dig another one. Here's a thought, just a wee aside, a little bit extra. I don't need to charge you for it. Sometimes, perhaps, you are the other end of the line for someone else. So make sure that when God prompts you, when you sense God saying to you to do something or call someone or visit someone, make sure you do it. Because you could be the other end of the line for that someone. But come back, okay? Brook's dried up. Elijah goes to Zarephath. And he gets to the town and he sees this widow. And she's there gathering sticks. And God says to Elijah, she's the one. She's the one that's going to care for you. So we're told in verse 10 of chapter 17, he calls out to her and he says, would you bring me a little water in a jar so I may have a drink? Now, you know that there's a drought going on. You know, this is not a small request. Like, you don't just go to Save Mart and buy a bottle of water. And she's facing starvation with her son, but we're told she was already on her way to get it, and she was going to get it to Elijah. And Elijah called, and he says, verse 11, and don't just bring me a little bit of water, can you bring me a piece of bread? Now, for a few minutes, put yourself in Elijah's shoes, okay? He has honored God. He has served God. He stood up for God. He's defied a king. That's caused him to have to live as a hermit for a couple of years in desert. And now God says, Elijah, I'm going to care for you. And there's a widow, there's a woman, and she's going to meet you. And Elijah has to be thinking, well, I hope she's got a nice home with a flat screen and all that. And all he asks for is bread and water. So immediately we've got to change our thinking. And then she tells him her story. She says, verse 12, as surely as the Lord your God lives, I don't have any bread. Only a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in a jug. And I'm gathering a few sticks to take home to make a meal for myself and my son that we may eat it and die. Elijah, who has been living as a hermit in survival mode, hears God say, I'm going to look after you. And the woman that God sends to look after him is more desperate than Elijah is. And Elijah says to the woman, don't be afraid. Go home and do as you have said, but first, bake me a cake from what you have and bring it to me. Then make something for yourself and for your son. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. The jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry until the day the Lord gives rain on the land. Now, yeah. Put yourself in the widow's place. She only has enough food for one loaf of bread, and she's supposed to fix it first for this stranger, this foreigner. Zarephath was not in Israel. The people of Zarephath did not worship the God that Elijah spoke about. She goes back home thinking, I must be out of my mind. He's a man, I'm a woman. He can fend for himself. I have nobody. I have a son that I have to provide for, and he doesn't have to worry about anybody else. All I had was enough for me and my son, and now I'm about to give it to some foreigner that I don't know, I must be crazy. And she pours out the last of the flour. And she kneads it into a cake. And she bakes it over a fire. And now she has a choice. Do I feed my son and I? Or do I give it to this man? And understand, when she gives away this cake, she has nothing. She didn't have $10 left in her savings account. She doesn't even have $1 left in her account. She is zero. She has a choice. You have a choice. As you walk past the offering this morning, or you have a choice. You have a choice. And she gives it to Elijah. And I imagine she then goes back home and she sits by her flour jar for a few minutes. What have I done? And finally she looks in that flour jar. And there it is out of nowhere. There's enough. The whole jar's not full. There's not bushels of flour. But there's enough. And verses 15 and 16 of 1 Kings chapter 17 says these words, so there was food every day for Elijah and the woman and her family. The jar of flour was not used up, and the jug of oil did not run dry. Every day Elijah would watch as the widow goes to the barrel where she kept the flour. And every day she and her son would hold their breath as she reaches down. Because the flour never came to the top of the barrel. The flour always was just enough. And her fingers scraped the bottom of the wood, but she came up smiling with a handful of flour every day. Enough to bake another cake. It was there. Daily, she trusted in God because yesterday's had gone. Last story, and I hope the bell's ringing for a few of you. Ken Davis tells the story of a pastor, a friend of his called Joel Morgan. And Joel was planning on visiting missionaries in Eastern Europe at that time, Romania, before Romania really found its freedom. And he asked friends who had traveled in that area, what should he take when he goes to visit these missionaries in Romania? And everyone suggested, hey, you need to bring a little bit of food, some snacks, because you're staying in rural villages. There's no electricity. Often the running water is cut off, and you can go without some food. So it would be wise to have pack some snacks, and just for survival. And Joe thinks, okay. So he goes to a local grocery store, and as he's walking through the store, he's thinking, what do I take as snacks? I've never been to Romania. I don't know what it's like. And, well, what's going to spoil? What could customs confiscate? And so he whispers this prayer as he walks down the aisle. Lord, you know the things I need. And the things that are the right things to take. And so just, Lord, prompt me to select the right items. And instantly as he makes that prayer, his eyes fall on a display of Reese's peanut butter cups. So he puts a king pack of them into his cart. And further down, he's drawn to an arrangement of tapioca pudding snacks. From my perspective, I think that anybody who's drawn to tapioca pudding, it's a miracle. But he put it into his bag. And then he picks up some small cans of fruit cocktails and small mandarin oranges, some hard candy, and he thinks, that'll get me over if I'm hungry. You see? So they're on the trip, and he arrives in Romania, and he spent some weeks or some days there already, and eventually he reaches this couple who have labored for nearly 2 years, and the family had been sent to Romania by a national mission organization, but for all practical purposes, they've been forgotten. And they face pretty harsh conditions. Heat and electricity often not there, not a lot of always clean water. And Joel and the team that were with him were the first English-speaking people that they'd seen in many months. And the simple opportunity to talk to someone was cause for celebration. And their 2 teenage daughters who had been with them starved of anything American. So Joel spends some time chatting and praying, and he's about to leave when he remembers he's got these goodies in his backpack. And so he's an idea. It's October there, but he thinks, why not have an early Christmas? And so he gets his backpack and with all the goodies hidden, and he takes on the role of Santa Claus, and he asks the teenage girls, if you could have one thing from the U.S., what would it be? And in unison they said, candy. And what kind? And Joe's pretty confident that they'll like anything he's got, But the mother chimes in, and the mother says, the girls love Reese's peanut butter cups. But they're not available in Romania. And with a lump in his throat, Joel reaches into his backpack, and he pulls out the king-sized package that he'd smuggled into the country. And the girls, full of joy and laughter, and they hold this Reese's peanut butter cup in their hand. Wiping away a little tear from his eye, Joel turns to the mother and says, hey, what item from back home would brighten your day? And she says, I miss fruit, especially citrus. And reaching into his bag, Joel extracts a can of small mandarin oranges. And now everybody's laughing and everybody's wiping away a little bit of a tear. And after a time of joy and celebration, Joel turns to the father. His backpack was nearly empty, and he considered removing the last few items and asking the father to make his selection. 2 out of 3 miracles ain't a bad thing. Let's not go for 3, But something in his soul shouts, go for it, Joel. And before he could argue with God, he hears himself say to this friend, Gary, he says, Gary, what's your favorite dessert? And this wonderful servant of God smiles and says, it's something that no one else in the world likes. Tapioca pudding. And Joel, he nearly injures himself pulling out the backpack and racing across with a super 4-pack of tapioca pudding that God had prompted him to buy some weeks earlier in a grocery store thousands of miles away. And what followed was praise and worship in its purest forms. 9 people crowded in a little tiny room in rural Romania, weeping and praising God. Why do I still wear Nikes? Why is my devotion to Jesus not complete and total? Why do I still have two Jesuses? Why? May you, with God's help, live for the right Jesus, the true Jesus, and give him my full allegiance and trust him that even although his call is a high call, he will enable. And may I run away from this other Jesus that makes following him easier. He's not the real Jesus. Let's pray before we have final closing song this morning.